We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to." And in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand.
Hey, good evening, everybody that's stepped into the constitutional cohort from the Conscious Conservative Network. I appreciate y'all 100%. I don't know if this thing is going off like it should or not. I don't know yet. Can you hear me there, brother Trayvon?
Yes, I can.
All right, excellent. Had some technical difficulties with this thing here. Freaking YouTube had decided to say, well, you know, Rod, we're not gonna let you do your thing today, you know. So I had to work some things out, but you know, I appreciate you stepping in here. Hopefully some other folk come up in here and we can have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's right. Is that right? Okay. Let me fix that part. Okay, I think we're good now. How's your day going, brother?
Man, it's going good.
Yeah, I hear you. Oh, man. Crazy events yesterday, huh? Crazy events yesterday. For real.
Mm-hmm.
Lord Jesus, I tell you.
It's a mess.
This whole 2020 has just been a mess. It just spilled over into 6 more days into 2021. Call it 2020
Yeah.
2020 2.0. You know what I mean? Oh man.
Absolutely.
Hey, did you get a chance to watch any of the electoral college yesterday?
I did. It's just a little bit of it, you know. It was a lot of drama, and it was a foregone conclusion where it was going.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but it's a fascinating process.
Yes, it is. It is. It definitely is a fascinating process. I've been an elector twice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've been an elector twice. It's definitely it's process. Let me tell you, it's a process for sure, man. I tell you. So I want to start off. Let you know a little bit about me and everybody else that's probably eventually. Oh, there's other people sliding in. Let me get them up in here. There's a Greg in here twice. Hold on, let me get people up in here. I see you there, Greg. Greg twice. Which one are you in there, brother?
I'm in here. I had to do one for the camera and one for audio.
Oh, that really sucks. That sucks. Well, I appreciate
4 minutes webcam, one iPhone.
Oh, geez. No wrong with that though. Long as you get in and get it in, appreciate you stopping in. I'm gonna introduce myself real quick. You already know I'm Roderick Threets. I'm a retired maritime captain and and had a career with the Foreign Service for a small period of time in my life between running tugboats and stuff. I've been a constitutionalist pretty much all my life. This is not a new realm for me when it comes to talking about the document that secures our freedom and our liberty. I guess after retirement age, I became more politically active because obviously I was more mainland than I was anything. So I had nothing else to do. So I infused myself into the conversation. This was about 2000, 2012, 2013. I started infusing myself into the conversation, and a lot has happened over that period in time with history repeating itself, right? And the multitudes of people that have stepped on our Constitution beyond measure. And we're not gonna sit here. I'm gonna point fingers or all that at who this, whom, and that, and the third. I won't do that. But what I will tell you is it made me realize how much more our Constitution matters, right? To us as they keep chipping away at it with these BS mandates and fake legislation that subverts the Constitution, all this, that, and the third. I started last year. I started what is now called Black Patriot Media Group. It was going to be a audio podcast network, but it's kind of expanded to a little bit of online production, a YouTube channel, and it's expanded to this. So I'm kind of blessed to be able to kind of let my voice, be out there, and try to inform others. And actually, really, what I like to do is intrigue people to do more research. You know what I mean? I'm a type of person, I'll give you nuggets to run with and let you dive down, let people dive down into it to see where I'm coming from, what I'm saying, or even you even find more about it. I think that's the best piece when it comes to being part of this movement, or being part of the conservative movement, is fostering each other with a little bit of information, make us have us hungry to go for more, right? So that's what I like to do for the most part. So that's enough of me talking. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick, Mr. Trayvon or Greg, take your pick.
Sure, I'm Trevon. I'm from New Jersey. I have a long-standing interest and passion for the Constitution and its preamble, rather its precursor, the Declaration of Independence, and seeing how it has really been watered down through amendments, as well as through all of the other things that have happened in the federal government to overreach, and the really the overreaching of the three co-equal branches as well, has really been troubling. And I welcome a discussion of being involved. I'm a pastor, and so I have a faith perspective to this as well. But because I do believe freedom is a fundamental thing that we must, as this country, protect.
I agree. Oh, I so agree 100%. You can go ahead there, Greg.
Hey, I'm Greg, from here in North Carolina. Got really interested in getting more involved in politics, I would say in the last couple or 3 years or so, and then found Felicia online and got involved a little more with the Conscious Conservative Network. Been following Roderick's cohort here around constitutionalism. Gotta admit, it's an area that I'm not really that strong on, but I'm trying to understand a little better, and especially in light of what we've seen the last few days, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Right on. I appreciate that 100%. One thing I will say about, okay, people see they can't get in. One thing I will say about the Constitution is we have to make sure that we understand the context they wrote it in, right? And I always suggest when people are reading the Constitution, trying to understand the Constitution, that you find Johnson's dictionary online, right? Because that's the dictionary that they actually wrote, basically the definitions that they wrote from when they wrote the Constitution, during that period in time, during the Confederation period, right? So that's very important because we've got to a point where people have changed the meaning of words. And when they do that, it allows them, just like Antonin Scalia said, to read in rights and read out rights in the Constitution, because people want to change the language of words. That's very important. That's why they hate originalists, right? I'm a devout originalist, as you've probably seen on the post before, because the words meant what they meant back then, and they're not translatable to any other language. One of the biggest controversies right now is the Equal Rights Amendment that is still up for ratification by a few states, and we have the argument that women aren't written in the Constitution. One of the reasons they want the Equal Rights Amendment placed in the Constitution, but then when you point people to the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment, where it says persons, and then you bring up the fact that when is a woman not a person? And according to Johnson's dictionary, a person is a male or female. So you know what I mean. It's about making sure we keep the originalist language of the Constitution to understand what's going on today, and that kind of leads into the elections discussion on what happened yesterday, even the days preceding. Right. Um, a lot of people have lost sight.
May I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Because here's my challenge is that we seem to always lose the war of words
Mm-hmm.
in defining words, and I don't know how we can, as constitutionalists, win this battle because those who are anti-constitution are constantly redefining words. The Supreme Court is allowing words to be redefined,
Mm-hmm.
and and nothing gets said, and then this whole myth evolves that the Constitution means more than it really meant, or laws mean more than they meant. So now sex is not just male female; it is sexual orientation.
Right. Right. And we it's the fact that we have to, and there's few of us, and that's what makes it a big challenge. There's a few of us that understand the language of back then and try to hold to it and not change it. And we have to get people to we have to get people to read, the text as it is, right? Because I mean, there's not many of us old school constitutionalists left. There's not many. And the way the schools have taught, even my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, right? Even my generation, they started changing the language back in the early '80s, mid '80s, to mean, obviously to mean different things. And when I finally figured it out, when I got to college, and a lot of the words I thought meant one thing in high school was a lie. It was a straight up lie. And I'm like, wait, these words mean this. And I learned this from Dr. Carol Swain. If y'all know who she is, I actually was in her geopolitical class for 2 years at Vanderbilt, and she made me realize like a lot of what I was taught, a lot of the words I taught definitions were not actually what they meant and where the roots came from, and it was like wow. And then I went back and I started reading the Constitution again. I'm like, now this is making sense, and I see why people want to change the language of certain words in there to fit their narrative. So I mean, really, in the end, I mean, what we really have to do is just make sure we stay consistent with the language, right? And make sure people understand the time period they were in, and the words they use in the King's English. I mean, I don't want to get too far off base, but if we think about the King James version of the Bible, right? A majority of that English is in the Constitution, same meaning, same words. Why do you think they want to get rid of the King James version of the Bible? Because it doesn't make sense to them. So now we have that with the new international version of the Bible now that is like the universal norm that changes the language. That's the first indication that we know, right, that language is changing, it's evolving because people don't understand the language of that day. So they got to plug and prod and put in what they feel like um, into what they feel is right or wrong. So. Okay, give me a second. I gotta. Someone said they can't view it. So let me see if I can. Aha! I think I did it. Yes, I did it. Okay, outsiders can watch now. People saying they couldn't get in to watch it, so it's all good. It's all good. So, I want to kind of start a discussion with the election process from the start to the end is regarding the Constitution. Um, I'll start with Greg. What about the process of the elections and the Constitution that really disturbed you?
What was really bring a lot of questions for me was this last little development where they were looking to Pence to potentially overturn the election results or decertify the electors or so forth. And from what I understand, that's not something he's got the constitutional authority to do.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. And so many people really get that wrong because again, people don't understand the language and the context of that said document and thinking this they have unprecedented authority with that. What about you, Trevon? You're
I'm
muted.
muted. Sorry.
There you
Yep. Sorry about that.
go.
Yeah. So no, I agree with what Greg said. It's a bridge too far to think that one person can just unilaterally do something that the states are supposed to do. So that once again, it's a complete ignorance of what the Constitution talks about because the states control electors. And if there were really, and I'll say courageous legislatures that really felt that their electors were miscast, then they should have by resolution passed something that said we want you to disqualify our electors or something. But
Mm-hmm.
they all sending a letter saying, hey, don't accept our electors, that somehow that would have any force of law or have any force to make the Congress do something different is just not how it works.
Right. That's exactly correct. And those are the two complaints that one of the two complaints I had about it also. But the other part of it is what people missed during this process is the state legislatures had their hands tied too, right? Because I know everybody's heard about the ECA of 1887 and all this, that, and the third, which on its face is unconstitutional, right? It's unconstitutional to the face. And if Louis Gohmert was really serious about nullifying the ECA of 1887, he would have sued the correct entity. I mean, he's a lawyer. He knows what entity he should have sued, right? So that goes to the next question. Who should have Louis Gohmert sued in that lawsuit?
Would it have been the Article 1?
Yes, that is correct. He would have sued Article 1 because they passed the law. He sued
Right,
Mike
Congress.
Pence, right?
Right.
He sued the person that's performing the action, right? When you
Yeah.
should be suing Article
The
1
institution.
itself, right?
Right.
That would have had more merit, right? Because governors are not to be certifying electors. Period. That is
Right.
not what what Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 and 3 says.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere in there says governor. Period. Whatsoever. You know what I mean? That's kind of like, that's kind of like the president unilaterally just saying, you know what? I don't even care about half these laws. I'm not even going to follow them. I'm going to just go over here and get in the hip pocket, right? It doesn't work like that. And it's the same thing with states. And amongst this that is lost with a lot of people, even with the argument with Pence wanting to do this, is federalism. Federalism is lost in all of this. People just think this
Mm-hmm.
republic works the way it is, but they haven't woken up to understand what has happened to our Constitution. Like you said from the start, the Constitution has been watered down literally since the 11th Amendment. If you want to be completely honest, it's been watered down
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason whatsoever by from the 11th Amendment down. Because there's amendments in there that counter what is said in the actual original Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
But people, they were born into this and taught this way, so their train of thought is, well, this is the Constitution and all these amendments, so it has to be right. And a lot of that also comes from folks not understanding, again, like I said, federalism and what the 17th Amendment did to the Constitution. It literally, that amendment literally made the Constitution null and void at that point in time. It made it null and void. So what they ended up doing is handing basically the power to the governors is what they did. Kind of like the legislative branch now has done to the president. They just handed all their powers to the president. He governs by executive order,
Hmm.
like we drink water every day. It's just like, oh yeah, okay, here, go do this, Mr. President, because we're not going to sit here and do anything. Mr. President, do everything, and it's not how it's supposed to work, right? So again, like I said, it put the state legislators in a bind. It put them in a serious bind and not be able to follow by the Constitution, by doing that. Now, with the issues with the voter, they like to say voter fraud. I like to say election impropriety because in that regard, you can't pinpoint say, oh, this is fraud, right? You can say election impropriety, and you can cover a myriad of issues
Hmm.
when you do that. And then that was for me. That was the first mistake that was made.
Hmm.
Voter fraud. That was the first mistake made. We know there's irregularities in the election process, but they attacked it wrong. The attack was completely wrong, to be personally honest, right? Was it enough to overturn the election? Maybe, maybe not. Don't know for sure. I'm not a forensic analyst. I'm not any of that. Inspect ballots. So that's why I've never opined on that particular situation. Because it's like, I don't know. I don't have the data. How can I say, oh, there's a bunch of fraud? But we know there's always irregularities. And the fact that states went to mail in balloting within 6 months of an election should have raised red flags for everyone, period. It should have raised red flags for everyone to question the process right there. Because I live in a state that's been doing mail in balloting for the last 4 election cycles. It took us 3 to get it right. It took us 3 to get it right. How do you expect the state that's never done it to get it right in 6 months? Right? On the first election cycle. Like it's just there's gonna be too many anomalies. That we seen it. We had a 9% anomaly in our first cycle when we did it, and then we had to recount it, and recounting everything basically by hand, right, to make sure it was off. And that's where they found a discrepancy, how the machines weren't counting correctly or people were miscounting. So we shored up our process just like Colorado did. Now, I'm not a fan of mail-in balloting. Don't get me started there. Not a fan of it at all. Period. Right? Because I think it's unconstitutional. But that's another story. Um, but I would expect people that have common sense to say, hey, just maybe we're humans, we commit errors, and this is a first time process. Maybe we should really further scrutinize this issue, when it comes to mail in balloting. Um, with that, I also want to mention. Well, let me back that up a second. I don't want. I'm gonna pose this question because it's gonna spiderweb in many different directions, so we can have a pretty wide discussion. Um, how many times how many times does the Constitution mention elections? What dates? What dates does it actually mention elections and how they're administered or finality in elections?
It's a good question. I know that it speaks to the inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I don't
I'm
know.
not
Does it
recall.
actually specify a date for them?
Not a date, but it tells
Uh huh.
you when, where, and how.
Is that in the 12th amendment?
It
Which
actually it's not. It's not in the 12th. Why is the Okay? Why is it frozen? Why are we frozen? Can y'all see me moving?
uh-huh.
Okay, y'all are
Yeah.
frozen to me. Okay, there you are. Okay, that works. Okay, that's what was going on. My processor started going crazy. Okay, so the Constitution actually only mentions 3 dates. Okay, it mentions the first Monday in November
Oh,
being,
Section 4. Okay. Yeah.
yep, Section 4. That's correct. It also mentions the Electoral College Day, right, which is going to
Hmm.
be the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, and Inauguration
Hmm.
Day. That's it. And even Inauguration Day is just a formality, right? Because it's not even written in the original Constitution. This is something someone just brought along later. As a constitutional amendment, right? The 21st Amendment does that, right? It says the 20th is the final day um,
Hmm.
of the election. If I'm wrong, I stand corrected. I think it is the 21st. I think it's 21st. That actually determines the day the presidential terms are. Could be the 22nd. Now I'm thinking. Hold on a minute. I mean, you're pretty sure about this. I'm having brain
Well, the
fog.
22nd limits the office of the presidency to
Okay,
two
right.
terms.
So it'd be the 20. It's the 21st, and would be the one that determines it's the 20th day of January. This is gonna be the one preceding that. Because the 19th killed prohibition. Okay, I'm just having a brain freeze right now. Don't mind me. Don't mind me right now. Information overload. But those are the dates people forget, right? Everything else in between, like Title 5, Section 7 of the United States Code, that's formality, right? That's when the 6th comes into play, right? Where they certify the electors, all this, that, and the third. I mean, technically speaking, I think we have an understanding that they don't have to really certify anything until January 20th, right?
Hmm.
As long as it's before noon, right? Before noon on January 20th, they can wait all the way up until then. And I think people that really were true to the Constitution, especially in the federal house, right, would have abided by that. And if they were really serious about this election impropriety, they would have attacked this from multiple angles. They would have attacked the federal statutes, that the formality, as I call it, of this process, to give them more time to bring this stuff out.
Hmm.
But they didn't. Improper lawsuits, and then they never brought the lawsuits back. It was like, okay,
Hmm.
yeah, we give up. It's like, it's a song and dance. So my thing, that's my biggest beef right now with um, both sides of the aisle in Congress. They claim they want to uphold the Constitution, but when you get a chance to strike down an unconstitutional law, you balk.
Right.
You
Right.
balk, and then you turn around and you pass another law that further waters down our rights. It's like,
Hmm.
what? Kind of
Yeah.
makes you wonder. Go ahead.
Well, because it's more about power than it is about really upholding the Constitution. So it's about
Mm-hmm.
centralizing more power in the hands of the government rather than keeping the people free.
Right. That's exactly correct. They forget the doctrine of self governance, and that kind of leads into.
Yet the word Constitution just becomes a little clever tool to use in a speech or something like that, but they never really put
Mm-hmm.
it into practice.
Right. That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. Practice hasn't been practiced since 1918. To be honest, I mean, that's just the honest opinion behind that. I mean, they shredded this country apart through the Constitution in 1918. You know what I mean? I mean, we just have the structure and the formality, and the people that play the game, plays the game within the sphere. They try to make it look good while they enrich themselves. That's why these people sit in power for 40, 45, 50 years. That's ridiculous. That would have never been heard of, in the 19th century. That would have never been heard of. Like, you getting up out of here. You know what I mean? The turnover was great. But then again, once we ratified the 17th Amendment, that was it. That was it. At that point in time, we went back to the Confederated States of America. under the guise of the 50 stars, the 50 stars in red, white, and blue. So
Now, you've mentioned the 17th Amendment a couple of times. Maybe we should talk about that just a little bit for all the people who are watching, because I think that was a turning point.
yes, yeah, the 17th Amendment basically took the power away from the states. It literally watered down America on many different levels. The first level, obviously, it took away the state's autonomy out of the federal legislature because when John Jay and James Madison, and even going back to the Connecticut Compromise, right, or the Sherman Compromise, the agreement was to have two different houses in the legislature, the Senate and the House, and the power of the states would be in the Senate. That was their voice, and the House obviously was the voice of the people. That was finite. Period. When they ratified the 17th Amendment, it made the Senate the people's house too, which absolved state sovereignty on its face, which ended up diluting the Ninth and 10th Amendment. Because immediately
Yep.
after the 17th Amendment happened, and here's something that's very interesting. Jacobson versus Massachusetts came up, and we know y'all know what Jacobson versus Massachusetts is, right? The vaccine court case.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, the biggest debate right now with this vaccine thing, right, is we don't want to take it, or we don't want to be plunged with a needle, this, that, and the third, what have you. And for me personally, medical liberty is a Ninth Amendment right. It falls under the Ninth Amendment, period. That's an unenumerated right that is not written in the Constitution, but it's a human right, and human rights are secured in the Constitution, right? So that's where that would fall. Now, Jacobson versus Massachusetts was a case during the Spanish flu pandemic, and the schools wanted to vaccinate people, et cetera, and personally, the Supreme Court basically struck down the Ninth Amendment when they opined that the states could force you to take a vaccine under any circumstance. That's what Jacobson, Massachusetts, and Prince versus Massachusetts decision was basically the same thing. They tried to bring the case back again under a different name, and it was struck down again on the grounds that the states had autonomy, right, to do so. Now, with that being said, during these cases was 1933 and Prince was 1943. Remember, the 17th Amendment was ratified in 1918, right?
Is this the reason?
Go ahead.
Is this the reason why, like, when you start school, the kids have to get vaccinated now? Is that what led to that?
Jacobson versus Massachusetts and Prince versus Massachusetts. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So when they stripped the power away from the states, right, in the federal government, and the people said we want certain things, it doesn't even matter at this point, right? I mean, the government in the states work on a quid pro quo. And when we talked about Joe Biden and the quid pro quo, our government does it every single day. When they dangle that carrot, well, if you do this for us, we'll give you this much money. And it shouldn't even be like that. It shouldn't even be like that because, again, and another thing that component that goes with that too is the Commerce Clause, right? The Commerce Clause was stepped on when they basically ratified the 17th Amendment. You know what I mean? Because now the federal government really controls interstate commerce, really truthfully controls it. Whatever goes across, whatever comes back, etc. But again, going back to the 10th Amendment argument in that, right? It convoluted federalism, right? And we know federalism being the enumerated powers, the concurrent powers, and reserve powers, right? The 17th Amendment, when it diluted the 10th and took the state's power away, their sovereignty out of the federal government, it put together their concurrent powers and their enumerated powers, right? So now they're really infringing on all of our rights, even through the Constitution, which has allowed them to pass all these crazy laws that just take away a little bit of our freedoms, a little bit of our rights, through all of this. And that is completely disturbing. That's why we really need to overturn that and a bunch of other things that's going on after the 17th Amendment to actually bring America back to where she should be, and its fairness to not only the states but also to the people. Because right now it's not fair to the states at all, and we get trampled on because the states have to cover up the damage done by the federal government. Prime example, right? The expansion of Medicare. Who pays for that? Because the federal government decided that, oh, we can't handle the load anymore. We should pass it to the states. And people are like, oh, this is a good thing. No, it's not. Federal government messed it up and tried to pass the buck off to the states because of their screw up over the last, 70 years Medicare has been running. It puts an unwanted burden on the states, and it's trying to absolve the federal government of its unfunded liability of $169 trillion to Medicare. So that's what they're trying to do when they're trying to expand Medicare. So I think I answered. Yeah, so yeah, we're on 17th. Yeah, we're on this good old 17th Amendment. Yeah. Well, even with that, with the election laws, right, in the 17th Amendment, and the states still having their hands tied, it really put our Constitution in a bind. And I'll be honest, I was hoping for a constitutional crisis. I was waiting for it. I was sitting back like, come on, bring it on, please. And we shouldn't. I shouldn't want that, but at the same time, it's like it's needed. The Constitution needs to be challenged against all these federal mandates and statutes that they're just passing, just whatever, and they're quote unquote legal experts. Like, oh yeah, well this is the precedent, so I guess we got to follow the precedent. What does that document say? Right, and we got to get back to what does that document say? Oh, it counters what it says? Nah, because again, the supremacy clause, right? All laws contrary notwithstanding. It means what it says. This is it. You counter this, you go against it, your law sucks. Your law literally sucks. Go try that again. But we don't have that anymore because the people have been asleep when it's come to this. Even I'm talking about the ones that's been in the game for a long time. They've remained asleep or been in a drunken stupor as they're passing these laws and not understanding the document they swore to uphold. So I'm hoping now with this new wave of folks that are coming in to this, really get a grip and understanding of the Constitution to try to preserve it. If not, literally take away 16 amendments. Which would be a long haul, but we don't need all that extra stuff in there, right? And try to get us back to a equal and fair representation of the people. And people call me radical for wanting that, but it was done before and it can be done again, right? Because we have to remember too, before 1824 there was no popular election. There was no popular election before 1824, and we got along just fine.
So you're talking about how you hope this new group coming up understands this. That really, I think, even at the high school level, a fundamental course, just understanding the Constitution outside of a standard civics class should be required. So at least whether you go to college or not, you come out having some kind of clue about the Constitution, how it works.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. We have one day a year that me and like 4 of the guys will we go to the local high schools, and we actually have like a 3-hour class. We read the Constitution, read the clauses, and we add some historical context to those clauses and the most important ones, right? Bill of Rights, things like that, 12th Amendment. Article 2, Article 1 is really, I think, is the most important piece of the Constitution, because they're the people that are going to either take away our rights or release true freedom, and we got to hold them accountable, because Article 2 and Article 3 don't mean anything without Article 1. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, you're right. They should require a class. When I was in high school, civics was a year-long class, 2 years. You know what I mean? But
there's a larger benefit to those in power to have an ignorant populace, because then they don't know what the Constitution really says, and they'll just go on what people say the Constitution says, and
Or what
without
the news tells
understanding.
you it says.
Correct. Yep. Exactly.
That's exactly right. So I want to ask this I want to ask this question because I know I brought up a myriad of things. I want to get your hot take on it. Um, how do you think we achieve true equal representation? And I know there's a legal process that has to happen for this to happen. So I'm just I'm testing the waters and see kind of where we are on this one. So how do we get back to fair and equal representation in America again?
I think that is one of the greater challenges, because it requires courage. And I think that's really lacking on a lot of levels, particularly at the state level, but all the way up through Congress. Because ultimately, if we're going to do this thing the right way, there needs to be some election that takes place, not election, but voting that takes place to reverse some of this. I'm hoping an Article 5 Constitution, state convention brought to bear in order to replace some of this stuff and to correct some of this.
Right. You have an opinion, Greg?
Um, no, nothing I can think of as far as how you restore it. When you're saying equal representation, what specifically are you saying right there?
Okay, so going back to the earlier part of the conversation, right, with
Uh-huh.
with the creation of American bicameralism through the Sherman Compromise, where the states had representation, they were the Senate, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
and let me add more context to that, right? Because before the 17th Amendment, the states appointed senators to represent them in the federal government. They weren't elected by popular vote, right? Now, in the Constitution, the representation clause in the Constitution calls for one per 30,000. One representative per 30,000 citizens. Nowadays, it seems a little outlandish, but if we really think about really the Constitution and what what the founding fathers, they wanted fair representation of the people, right? Right now, we have a ratio of, on average, 1 to about 800,000 per congressional district. How does one person hear the voices of a million people?
Well, another thing too is like if you've got a state where so much of the population is maybe centered in one part of the state, and then you've got some other parts of the state that are very densely populated,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you might have one person who's the voice of a handful versus one who's the voice of so many. So, especially if you have like one with so many of one party is in one part of the state, and let's
Mm-hmm.
say you have a Democratic senator that represents, or a House of Representative congressperson that represents that group, and then you've got one of another party that maybe their constituents or that party is in a more densely part of the state. So it's hard to see. Seems hard for me to have equal representation in that regard.
Okay, and I definitely get your point there. Um, so there's a couple things legally that would have to happen to get the true fair representation. So the first thing we really would need to do is repeal the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1939. That act alone limited the House of Representatives to 435 people, never to be raised ever again. Now, we have had a population increase big time since 1939, right? And we get all these people packed into one spot. So that would be the first thing that we would have to eliminate to open up the window for equal representation. Because again, I mean, that act hasn't been challenged because there hasn't been a need to challenge it, right? There's nothing that's come up to challenge that law. And then obviously bring a representation clause argument against that particular law. Now,
State that act again. What is that act?
Permanent Apportionment Act of 1939.
Okay.
So yeah, with that law, it capped the House of Representatives to 435, except there was a period in time when they admitted Hawaii and Alaska, which had expanded to 437. But then after things got shifted around, it went back down to 435. So that'll be the first thing we need to do is unleash that so at least the people get a chance to have representation. The second piece, obviously, we've talked about it here, the 17th Amendment needs to go. Bye-bye 17th Amendment to give the states back their autonomy. Now, what we would need to do is ratify Article the First. Have y'all heard about Article the First?
No.
Okay, so Article the First was one of the amendments proposed to the Constitution during the Confederation period, and it basically it gave the mandate to expand the representation clause from 30,000 to 50,000 to eventually 60,000 per representative. We'd need to ratify that and use the 60,000, one per 60,000. That sounds likely. That sounds like a mayor, right? That sounds like, a city a mayor would oversee. It's a lot more manageable, right, than 1 to almost 1 million in some cases, right? And once we do that, then the people will have fair representation. And the unpopular opinion, and people always push back on me on this one, is the fact that if we have that kind of representation, we really don't need a popular vote to vote for president. If you really want to sit back and be honest, and let's talk about true America, right, and what the Constitution meant and what it wanted, it wasn't meant. This federal constitutional republic was not meant to be ran by the people, aka democracy, aka the mob, right? It wasn't structured that way. People threw that in there as appeasement. It's like, oh, well, your vote counts. Well, your vote counts through your House rep, right? Because they would have voted for the president. And if we sit here and think about it a second, right? If we take 60,000 divided by 350 million, right? You have well over 11,000 representatives, right? And those people, you vote those people in, right? And with that, with this whole ball of wax we just kind of threw out there, you want to talk about local government really matter? This is where it matters, right? Because not only are you electing your local representative to go represent you and your vote in Congress, you have direct contact with that person. Like how easy it is for you to get to a representative that's representing 60,000 people as to 1 million people. How much easier is that just to be able to, because I mean, these guys, I'll tell you what, these guys on Capitol Hill, they are overwhelmed. They are overwhelmed with constituents writing them, et cetera. And when you're getting tens of thousands of emails a day, like they literally can't hear you. I've had a few House reps and a few senators tell me when I've gone, because I go to DC probably once every month for a few days, whatever, and I go talk to people, and they even tell me like they appreciate when people do write them, but they can't get to them all. It's literally impossible to rummage through 3,000, 4,000 emails coming in a day, and if you don't only get to like a couple hundred of them, and you got another 4,000, like I actually looked at I'm real good friends with Mike Lee, my senator, and he showed me his inbox, and I'm just like, geez, how do you answer all that? I'm sitting that day, I was sitting there looking at 60,000 emails. How do you answer all that? You know what I mean?
I'd lose my mind if I looked at my inbox and saw that many messages being unanswered.
Yeah.
Well, but here's where I have very little sympathy for our elected officials in that regard, because they apportion for themselves something like $5 million a year for staffing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know that constituent response is important and emails and everything else is important, then you hire people who can do it.
Right.
You see, because they apportion the money for them to make sure their staff is well paid, and they gave themselves a raise even during the pandemic. So they have the money to do what they need to do. It's just that they really don't care what the constituents say ultimately, because there are other funders who they care more about, and that's usually the lobbyists and those type of people who really can pull their strings.
Right.
So they don't care about we the people.
I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. I really do. I mean, I've always been a person. If we're a government of the people, by the people, for we the people, right? I want a personalized response from that senator or House rep myself. I want them to sit down. I don't want to see a blanket copy. I want to see that person. I want to see their thoughts on that email or that letter they write back, right? And I want to see their words instead of like this like, oh, thank you for responding. This. No, I don't want to hear that, right? So in that regard, that's why we need we need the equal and fair representation of the people, so they're able to personalize that. And then with that too, it cuts most of the congressional budget for staff. You know what I mean? That money can come back to us where it belongs. Instead of taxing us, at $11,000-$12,000 a year to fund all that nonsense. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even necessary, really, at that point in time.
So since yesterday was the day that they counted the electors, how were presidents elected before this current system that we have?
Okay, so what they ended up doing was, obviously, the 12th Amendment was the cornerstone of this, right? Each House rep casted their ballot for whatever candidate. But here's the part people don't know. There was not a tandem. There was no tandem before 1824. There was not a tandem running for the executive branch, right? Like, for example, Pence, Trump, and Harris, Biden. Everybody ran for president. Everybody ran for president. And then the House would come in to vote and say, okay, this is what happened. These are all the electors. Okay, whoever had the most, president. Whoever had the second most, vice president. Done. Game over. That's exactly how they did it. That's exactly how they did it, right? So why wouldn't 11,000 representatives, why couldn't they do that? Why couldn't they do that?
Well, and what did we lose when we went to this more popular system?
We actually lost. Oh God, where do we start?
Mm-hmm.
Where do we really start? I mean, we really lost. I guess the best way to put that, because I have a myriad of things in my head right now. We lost what should have been true federalism at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we
Right.
truly lost, because we
Right.
should not be voting anything on the federal level. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Right. And we empowered an executive branch. So we empowered the Article 2 with far more power than it's supposed to have.
That's
Because the
exactly
idea was that the president of the United States was nothing more than almost like a super congressman or a super senator.
Yep.
They weren't meant to be this world powerful leader of the whole, they were supposed to be, we're selecting you out of this group of people to just be an executive. We're hiring you for this for a period of time, and then we can fire you and get somebody else in there.
Yep. That's exactly it.
Well, once upon a time, though, it was just like common men or women, of everyday walks of life could run for these positions. It wasn't like a professional politician, so to speak, right?
That's exactly correct. I mean, even though a lot of these guys were professionals in their profession, you had lawyers, doctors, masons, all kinds of people that sat in the seat, but a college degree wasn't like now. If you don't have a college degree, you can't even think about even sitting in office, and that wasn't what this was based off of, right?
Correct.
I mean, this is it
Correct.
became an elitist political structure.
Now, right, and that's what it is today.
Yeah.
See, because Congress still only works about 130 days a year.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
I mean, just let that sink in. They are scheduled to be on task a third of the year.
Mm-hmm.
but yet they make a professional salary of over $175,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. I mean, heck, their state legislatures that work longer than they do.
Exactly.
But you know what?
Well,
Go ahead.
no, and we tolerate. My point was this: we tolerate this. We know it, and we tolerate it as if it's okay.
Mm-hmm. You was gonna say something, Greg?
No. I'm just kind of agreeing with what he was saying.
Okay. All right, gotcha. And again, that goes back to the structure that we had pre 1950, pre antebellum era, right? Where the legislature would meet. Literally, they would only meet a handful of times a year. They'd be like, "Wait, this is what's going on," instead of all year long. Like you're gonna be a full time legislature, but don't show up full time. I tell you what, if you if you got a full time job and you showing up on part time hours, you ain't gonna be there too long. You know what I'm saying? You ain't gonna be there too long. You're gonna be like, they're gonna just show you the door, tell you to roll out. You know what I mean? But if we get, going back to the original part of the conversation, if we get those 11,000 representatives, right, in the House, right, we won't need to pay them a salary because they won't have to be in Washington so much. I mean, heck, if the pandemic didn't prove anything to us, we can do things through Skype and Zoom. You know what I mean? We can do that. I don't agree with it, but we could do that if we had to, right? And the representatives can. You're muted.
But they don't need to be there. The thing is, the real work of what they're supposed to do based on Article 1 is a very limited portfolio that does not need an entire calendar year to do it, which is why they only schedule themselves for a third of the year.
Right.
So stick to the third of the year, but the rest of the year, go back to whatever job you have, and you get paid a third of what because you're only working a third of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. That's
Well, they did some things this year via Zoom, like some of the votes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Didn't they have some people vote
by
remotely?
Proxy,
yeah.
Well, they didn't vote by proxy, which is they were giving their votes to other congressmen to vote on their behalf, which is unconstitutional.
Yes, that it goes all completely against the quorum clause in the Constitution completely. But they won't fight that. No one fought that. That's what I'm saying. Like these little subtle things that they do. Oh, they didn't. The people didn't say anything about it. Hold my beer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
What else? What's the next thing? What's the next thing we can do?
Mm-hmm.
To take to not show up but still get paid.
And I mean, state legislatures get do more work than they do, which they should.
Right. And absolutely. And we did not get the $600 that they promised us. And many people are finding out that all they get to do is deduct the $600 from their taxes when they file them, because that's the way the law was written. So even people who thought they were going to get cash money are not even getting it. But nobody's incensed. Nobody's enraged that at the beginning of the pandemic, Congress gave itself a raise and then went on a 4-month hiatus.
Right.
But we, the American people, who were told not to work, to close our businesses, to stay at home and affect our finances, we got $1,200, and then that's supposed to satisfy us.
Some after like 8 months or more of being, on those harder times, and then here's 600, 1,200.
Yeah.
But
we think that's okay, and no one's outraged by that.
No, they're not. They're really not. They're really not. Like it's
like, here's just enough to stay comfortable, but and no more than that. Just enough to keep you going just a little bit.
This is enough to placate you.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's why they poured that money into unemployment, because they said people like getting this money and they won't complain about us giving ourselves $40,000 more.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll take the 600 a week, but we get 40,000 more, which over the lifetime of our political career will end up being worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like how does the normal American taxpayer pay $12,000 in taxes every year, but only get back 2% of that? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, going to the. I mean, if again, I know we're kind of getting off track here a little bit, but I think this is a discussion that really needs to be had. Um, if you're gonna sit here and tell me that I'm good enough to get $600 of my money back, 2% of the money I put in to taxes every year to run the federal government, and I'm only good enough to get back 600. No, I need my whole 10,000 back. You want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about stimulus? Give me
Mm-hmm.
all 10, 12,000 that money I paid into the treasury, because obviously
Right.
we're not using it right now because of this, and this issue. I need my money back.
Mm-hmm. Well, but just notice how you said that. You said, "Give me my money back," but most people don't even see it that way. They
Mm-hmm.
actually see the government as if the government is being kind enough to give us something,
Yes.
It's
and
like
they're
we're paying
not.
them a fee to
They are
exist.
refunds. Yeah, we're they're giving us our money back. They're not. They're
Mm-hmm.
not, because government doesn't have its own money.
Right. Right.
They
I
definitely
mean,
don't have their own money.
if we just get rid of the 16th Amendment, get rid of the 16th Amendment, that make the government run off of the direct tariffs clause in the Constitution, I think we'd be
Hmm.
better off.
Hmm.
Them controlling, the direct tariffs clause basically allows the government to tax imports and exports out of the country. That's where they'd make their money. Done.
Right.
You don't need to tax the people. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, the
We're
16th
taxed.
Amendment should go.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're taxed 4 times over. 4 times over, we're
Hmm.
taxed. I mean, some places that we live, like Illinois, for example, 71 cents on a dollar in taxes from between local tax, state tax, federal tax, almost 71 cents on a dollar. And let's don't talk
Hmm.
about the voluntary sales tax you pay into, right? When you purchase something, like, it's ridiculous. At the end of the day,
Hmm.
it's like the government gets everything and you get nothing, obviously, right? That's why
Hmm.
taxation is theft. To all the people watching, taxation
I
is
agree.
theft.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and
um,
now when you buy something online, you now have to pay taxes.
yep,
So so the Supreme Court came out and said, "Oh no, you even online you can pay. You have to pay those taxes."
yeah, yeah. Because you're selling a product or a good and you're making an income off of it. And yeah, that's exactly it, man. It's gotten so far out of hand. It's
You have to pay a fee to earn money.
Hmm.
right, which goes into I won't even get into that discussion right now, but which buys into the Keynesian economic system, right?
Hmm.
Keynesian economics basically is they take tax money and they try to gamble the tax money to make more money. You see where that's
To
gotten
make more
us.
money. Hmm.
You see,
Nowhere.
you see where, yeah, no money. We broke more at the tune of
Yep.
$24 trillion because of a
Yeah.
Keynesian
But
economic
everything we
system.
do, everything we do, the growth, the GDP and all of that is pegged to people being irresponsible with their money and always spending. So when the
Yep.
stimulus came and most people saved it, they didn't like that because they expected us to take that money and put it back into the economy by spending.
Mm-hmm.
But people did the prudent thing, which was to save money.
Yep.
But that breaks the system.
Yep. Yep.
They're out for
And
the short game. We're trying to play the long game.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's yeah. We'll give you this 600, but first we're gonna tax it because you would have to claim that on your tax return, right? And then you're gonna end up paying taxes on it if you got a state tax, right? It's a you get it. I ain't got to go through that. You get it. It is. It's just another big, huge money racket that they pull off. So yeah, one more one more question or topic before we get off here. As I guess it's going to be kind of two different questions at this point. Um, I guess I need to direct this one to Mr. Trevon there. Um, what part of the Constitution you think needs to be changed immediately when it comes to um, elections? Or let me rephrase that question. What federal statutes need to be removed that you can think right off the top of your head?
I'm drawing a blank on federal statutes. I don't like the populism that we're going towards. I don't like the mob rule mentality with the way we're voting. So I'm still a big proponent of getting rid of the 17th Amendment to return some semblance of federalism back to our system. So rather we can be a republic as we were intended to be, because a lot of the direct voting is not producing what the founders intended for this country to be. And it's weakening the local governments and giving more power to this overarching central government.
Mm-hmm. Completely agreed. And, I guess I'll throw the same question at you, Mr. Greg. What do you think?
Well, I would guess I would kind of go along with what he said, but one question I had about that, and I think you mentioned this earlier when you said we wouldn't really need this electoral college or whatever anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Would that then prevent states like California and New York from deciding the next president, for instance?
Yes, it would to a varying degree. It very would, but it would be more because you have to think too, right? If we went, if we broke it all down and we
Mm-hmm.
got to one per 60,000, think about all of red California that would really be represented in California at that
Mm.
point, right? Rather think about that, right? Because I mean, if we really think about it, Northern California is pretty red. Eastern California is pretty red. It's when you come right down that Pacific corridor from San Francisco down to San Leandro and San Jose, all the way down to LA, right? That there's a problem, with obviously it's all blue, right? So having the one per 60,000 in the areas in Northern California, Eastern California through the Sierra Nevada mountains, all that area, right? It would provide a balance to Congress with that. I mean, right now I think there's only there's three Republican representatives in Congress from California. If I remember correctly, I think there's only three. There might be four, and we know the the minority leader in the House, McCarthy. He's California 25, and there's like two others, but that's it, right? Devin Nunes and the guy that took Daryl Isa's seat. He's a Republican also, right? But
That's
that's
a good
it.
point you brought up because I was watching the other night as the results were coming in for the Georgia runoffs, and it showed the map of when it was almost all the votes were in. The whole state was almost entirely red with a small blue center, and I'm thinking, how are they winning? The whole state is red except for a blue center. How are they winning?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
what bothers me. I was like, yeah, I've always heard that that's what the Electoral College prevents from, California or New York or someplace like that from deciding. And I'm like, so that's just a small microcosm of that whole element there where you've got all these other demographics and such in other parts of, say, Georgia in this case,
Mm-hmm.
that are not being represented in the final choice of who's chosen, but you've got this small little group in one part of the state that's deciding something for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And this is something I have floated for years, and people tell me I'm cuckoo. I flew over the cuckoo's nest. You know that movie.
I mean, you're probably right.
But it's like, why don't we have a state electoral system as such?
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
I know how complicated that would be. I know
Mm-hmm.
exactly how complicated that would be, but it could get done. I mean, again, going back to the equal representation concept, right? I mean, every county, every municipality should be equally represented.
Hmm.
I mean, why not? But people, again, we
Hmm.
got that mob mentality, right? That mob rule, direct democracy kind of deal, right? And when you have states like California, right? When's the last time they had a Republican governor?
Arnold
A
was a
long time
Republican,
ago.
right?
Yeah.
Huh?
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
Arnold
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger.
Yep. And before him, it wasn't many more before
Reagan.
him. Reagan, yeah, that was it. I mean, we look at, we can look at Illinois. Well, I don't consider Bruce Rauner a true Republican. Yeah, he was their last governor before Pritzker, but before then it was all blue. It was all blue, right? Um,
Yeah.
and what this mob mentality has done is literally just taking the carpet from underneath the governmental systems in these states. I mean, I think some of these states
Yeah.
will never see a red governor again. I don't think they ever will because they're packing the cities. They're pushing people out of the country into the cities, which is, even to me personally, this whole scheme is really it's voter suppression. If you really get down to the core of the issue, it's because you're disenfranchising people's vote by throwing them into a diluted pool of blue. Their red vote isn't going to matter amongst all that unless they vote blue, and even then it doesn't even matter because the majority is blue anyway. So you're just your vote doesn't make a difference anymore.
Yeah. Well,
You're
there's a tyranny of this two-party system as well that is not
mhm
necessarily a legislative fix, but
mhm
having two parties that really dominate everything keeps us in this artificially divided environment when, in honesty, none of us is truly all red or truly all blue, as it were. Um,
right.
and but that we were forced to be in these categories, which in and of itself, and our founders were very clear about their disdain for these powerful political parties. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, this is a paraphrase, said that if heaven is partisan, then I would prefer hell.
That's right. He sure did. That he did say that. And really, what we have seen now, going off of your point there, Mr. Trevon, um, we're seeing the Democrat Republican Party forming again. They're coming back together again as they were in the
Exactly.
'60s.
It's
Exactly.
kind of like he said, the tyranny of the two-party system. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we have a D and an R next to our names, but they really are all in the DR party because they the fact that they fight with each other is really just for show, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yep.
real stuff happens when the cameras aren't rolling.
Yep.
Yep. And they cut the deals.
Yep.
Yep. Cut the check.
Well, you mentioned something before about forcing people out of the rural areas into cities and so forth like that. Would you say that also kind of goes in line when they have all these different like improvement projects, like highways or shopping centers come in and take out a whole neighborhood and the people have to move someplace else? Kind of
Funny,
like modern
funny,
day
right?
urban renewal.
Funny, and that goes that's part of the Strong Cities initiative too. Um, so you bring up a good point there. So we'll elaborate on that a second. Um, our lovely interstate system, the Eisenhower interstate system. What a lot of people, if people actually look at the maps of the interstates, those interstates were laid in certain areas on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to your bigger cities where interstates run through, you'll notice a very common denominator. It created segregation. You have one
Hmm.
side of the interstate is all minorities, and the other side of the interstate is all white. When they started putting in the loops, the 295 or what a 610 loop like in Houston, everybody outside of the loop in the suburbs, right? It created
Hmm.
racial segregation, and people don't realize, they don't think about it But when you look at these areas, I mean, if you look at Chicago, for example, right? The Dan Ryan, right? 80. Everything south of 80 is all black. That's where all the violent crimes happen. You don't see it up north of 80, up going towards Lakeshore Drive, none of that. The interstate system on purpose was laid out in these cities to separate and create that segregation, right? After the redlining had already taken place, they're like, okay, here's your indicator, here's where the redlining is. And people don't realize when they see it, they're like, really? Is that what they did? That's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. And with that, everything just that's just a whole nother conversation. A whole nother conversation. But yeah, there's a lot that goes in it. Go ahead, Greg.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. It kind of goes back decades and decades. It's been happening, but it still happens today.
Yeah. And part of that, and again, part of that is with the, again, the Strong Cities Initiative, right? Yeah, we're seeing, and part of that is, obviously bringing the rural into the urban. Big Brother, right? Cameras up on the light poles, and the Orbis system for speeding in certain areas of the country. All that is to huddle people into cities so they can control them at their will. They don't want people out in the sticks shooting guns on cans and stuff like that. That's like, oh, that's just another person. Tax money we can bring into the city so we can raise more taxes to make more. You get the scheme. We know the scheme. You know the thing. But same question to you. I see. This is what I hate when I sidetrack sometimes. Because it's like, wait, you get the conversation out of the way.
Yeah, we both answered.
Yeah, you both answered. Okay, so, you know my take on it and what we need to do to get back to true federalism, true equal representation of the people. Because really, at the end of the day, right, the system that we have disenfranchises everyone. We can't even go down racial lines with this one. It disenfranchises everyone and gives our federal government the opportunity to trample on our individual rights every single time, right? But the opposition will use race to create that issue, right? They will use that. They'll use race to create the issue that your individual right is more superior than someone else's, right? And then make the racial factions fight each other because, you know what I mean? I mean, we look at it, white privilege. You know what I mean? Like that was created to create this buffer between. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes people do favor race. I'm not saying people don't. I'm not going to sit here and say, debate that. No, it's not a thing. It can be a thing in certain circles, right? People have done that. You know what I mean? Throughout history, people do it now, right? We know what happens. You know what I mean? But we can't allow those type of things to distract us from what our individual rights are, the ones that are guaranteed to us in the Constitution. Because at the end of the day, go ahead.
As long as we're fighting each other, then the elite powerful can do whatever they want to do. So they find some reason to keep us fighting one another. Yep.
What was that, Greg?
So we're going into our camps, whatever the camp may be.
Yep. That's exactly right. I said that yesterday in my speech yesterday at the state capitol. the adverse of United We Stand, Divided We Fall is divide and conquer, right? And they're doing a good job of it. They're doing a real good job of it right now. It's at an all-time high right now for no reason. For no reason,
there is a reason. There is a reason, and the reason is to take more power. It is very intentional.
Yeah,
it is very intentional because as long as we're fighting, they can step in and do whatever they're going to do. And be very clear: after what happened yesterday, there are going to be a whole slew of laws and regulations that are going to come down to take more rights from us. Even I think it was Lindsey Graham today said he wants a commission that every person, that the FBI can grab people's videos and identify every single person that breached the Congress. Well, do you think it's going to stay just for those who breach the Congress? That whatever they develop,
I mean, like the Patriot Act was just for catching terrorists?
Yeah, it's going to be deployed all over the country and continue to take our rights away.
Yep.
The government has never really paid a price for the way that they steal our phone calls.
Yeah, I mean, let's before we jump out, let's have that discussion. The storming of the Capitol, right? And I guess I've heard your opinion on it, Mr. Trevon. I haven't heard yours yet, Greg. What is your opinion about yesterday?
I'm trying to not have the hot take like it was just MAGA going full blast on the Capitol, because I think that's not the whole story. And I've seen different footage that indicates that the people were being waved in as gates were being pulled open. Now, I don't know if I'm being shown that little clip for a reason. Probably so, as the media is trying to steer the narrative a certain way. But I don't think it's as simple as Trump supporters, like, we've had enough, we're going to overrun the Capitol. Why would they wait until now to do that? Why now? I mean, why not November 4th or whatever, Why now?
Yeah, exactly. And for me, this is the crescendo of what's been happening for the last 4 years, right? You've had extremist types, right, on both sides, right? I wouldn't even say both sides. Extremists are extremists, right? If you get on the political spectrum and it's in that political spectrum's a sphere, right? Moderate on one pole, extremism's on the opposite pole. This is not a left or right thing. Extremism, because they have the same goal of totalitarianism. They have the same exact goal, right? It's just question is, whose totalitarianism are you going to be ruled under, right?
Right.
So that's where the fight is, right? But the thing is that when the government allowed these extremists, the Antifa types, the neo-Nazi types, all this stuff, to just wage a war on society with impunity, this is when normal people become radicalized. This is when normal people be like, you know what? They're not going to do anything about this. And one of the arguments I got into this morning on a radio show this morning was, they're trying to say, well, Trump supporters, they're this, that, and the third, and this, whatever. I said, if you want to place that kind of blame on Republicans and conservatives, then I will place every bit of blame of BLM, Antifa, and all this stuff on Democrats. How fair is that? Right? I mean, if you want to throw that standard, how fair is that? Right?
Yeah.
Standards equally applied.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, see, we went down the slippery slope when people were justifying rioting and using the words of Dr. King to say, rioting is the voice of the unheard. Well, no, that's not the full thing of what he said. And even if he did say it, the basic point is all violence is wrong. The moment you excuse one set of violence, but allow other sets, or disallow other sets, you've created a very unfair system, and it's going to cause people to do crazy things.
Yeah.
You can't say for the last 8 months we had all this rioting. It's okay because it's for a purpose. But then what happened yesterday is so evil. It's all evil. All violence in a democratic society, in a civilized society, is wrong.
Yeah. That's
and I thought we agreed on that as a country, but clearly we don't.
No, we don't at all. We don't at all. I mean, and I understand the sentiment, right? Because I love the Declaration of Independence like everybody else, right? But what they've ended up doing was I don't think that we know that the Declaration of Independence tells us that we have every right we have every right to take down a tyrannical government, right? And obviously I'm ad libbing at this point, right? Um, but this is not the time. This is not the time for that. I mean, we still have some semblance of freedom, but what we ought to be doing to remedy this problem again is the citizen candidates that are running for office. We need to get those people in office. We need to fight this establishment because the establishment has proven to us that they're good for no one. They're only good for themselves and nobody else, right? What's good for thee is not good for you. You know what I mean? And we have to make sure. I mean, especially the next election cycle. And the next election cycle is probably going to be the most important election cycle in 2022 because all House seats are up for grabs this election cycle. All 435 of them are up for grabs. It's going to be interesting to see how this will turn out in 2022 with the election and with 34 Senate seats up for election is going to really shape the country. I mean, people think this election was important. Not important as 2022.
Yeah, this election just made 2022 even more important. You were talking
Yes.
about the establishment and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys had a chance to hear Breitbart News Daily this morning.
No, I haven't.
Mm. Well, Sonny was guest hosting, so I got a chance to call in. And that was one of the things that I was speaking of with her this morning as far as who's controlling the messaging, the establishment's controlling the messaging,
Mm-hmm.
and the media and that establishment is kind of working together to steer us towards a certain narrative as far as putting out these outlandish things about Trump and what Trump has done, and then you're forced into a position where even though he may not be your favorite person, you're forced to where you wind up defending him just by disputing their unfounded statements. Even though
Mm-hmm.
you don't mean to defend him, you're forced into a situation where you're doing that and they're controlling the narrative. So that's what you're focusing on instead of a message that will get out to a greater voting population that will make them better informed to make different decisions based on the right principles instead of staying divided and saying, no, that person's a D, I'm going to vote for the R or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And you bring up a very good point because too many people base their vote on sound bites, right? And I seen this in anecdotal to the state. I live in the state of Utah, and a lot of people didn't realize that they could actually like research all of the candidates on that ballot, right? The one thing the mail-in ballot has done has brought the issue of voting and vetting your candidates to your face. Because you see the ballot, you get it weeks before you're supposed to turn it in on election day, and you see all who's on there, the judges, all the amendments, all that. You get to see it beforehand. You know what I mean? I mean, you could get it before, right? Online beforehand, etc., right? But now they're sending it to you. Like, this is what's on the ballot. And it shocked me that many people didn't know you could research these candidates. Like, here, we have for like the judges, the judges commission here. They have a website. You can go look at the judges and see all the cases that they've adjudicated and how they ruled. You can, what I mean? You can actually see all this stuff. And a lot of people didn't know that. And a lot of other states have the same thing. People don't know this, but they want to sit there and be like, oh, well, this guy has an R. This guy has a D.
That's what low information voters is what we currently have.
Yes. Low information? You mean no information? Okay, you're being nice.
Yeah.
You said low. My bad. I'll leave it at low. I'll leave it at low. I'll leave it at low.
I'm being charitable.
But that's going to be a big importance going into 2021, going into 2022 is making sure the electorate is informed, because that's the biggest reason why the establishment exists. right, is because we have an uninformed electorate as a conglomerate, right? We have a very uninformed electorate, and they just see letters and roll with it, thinking, oh, this person's going to be the bomb because he's an R. Well, you know what? Throughout my voting history, I have voted for Democrats because I've seen situations where Democrats were more conservative than a Republican was. It's like, oh,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not
Yeah.
open. You know what I mean? I'm open to other parties, even though I'm a registered Republican. But again, if the Democrat is, upholding conservative values, guess what? Because, my values transcends any party, right? And if the Democrat or the Libertarian is espousing conservative values or even, ideas of liberty, I'm going to vote for that person. I'm going to vote for that person straight up. You know what I mean? And that's where we have to get to. And it's going to take a lot of informing the electorate because, term limits is not gonna solve the problem. It'll compound the problem because now the establishment knows there's a certain period in time where we got to make sure we groom another candidate like this guy because he's leaving to prop up instead of being able to come out of left field.
Yeah,
Like,
in other words,
Right.
they audition candidates and they hire them for that role.
Yeah. But what the truth is, if we recognize our power as voters, we can give every elected official a term limit by just not voting for them.
Right. Yeah.
But that's not what we do.
Nope. We sure don't. We sure don't. And with the limited number of seats, everybody is clamoring to get into that elitist class, going back to the equal representation
Absolutely.
piece, right? If we're
Yep.
delegating, you know what I mean, these people, see, and it's interesting, right? If we go back historically and we look at this country, let's look at Virginia, for example, right? They're a House of Delegates, right? And each in the lower chamber, they're delegates from their communities. That's what the role of the House representative is. You are a delegate of your community. You're sent people in that general area send you to advocate for them. The U.S. House of Representatives should return back to that. But we
Absolutely.
don't because there's too much money involved. There's too many
Too much money
involved. Right? If you go to Congress, depending on who the speaker is, you're going to have to kowtow to what they're talking about for the first year or two. Right? There was a show I saw on, was it HBO, about the swamp with Thomas Massey. Let me tell you something. If y'all get a chance to watch that, I'll find it and I'll put the name in the cohort. But it's a very interesting documentary that Thomas Massey and Rand Paul did about the swamp. And these two individuals, they're not on any committees. They're not.
Rand Paul's not on any committee?
Nope. Not anymore.
Interesting.
Not anymore.
I like him even better.
Not anymore.
Interesting.
Thomas Massey's the same way. A lot of those guys aren't on committees. That meaningless committees or appeasement, right? That because it's pointless. They're going to drive the narrative on what goes in and out of these committees onto the Senate floor or House floor, what have you, right? And it's all because of the political agenda of the Speaker of the House or the majority leader in the Senate. We have to, again, like I said, we have to get back to that equal representation. 1 in 60,000, crossing fingers. So that way we can hold these people accountable right here in our face. Like, just, we're done here. Like, you're either going to do this or we'll make sure you don't come back. Right? And you have 60,000 people that are going to show up to vote for you because they want your behind gone.
You restore that principle that they work for us. So you got like 60,000 supervisors.
Pretty much. That's more pressure than that's more pressure than having a job. You're like, you got like 1 or 2 supervisors at work, then you got 60,000 supervisors, and you're like, dang. It's like, who would want that pressure? You know what I'm saying? But it keeps you in line, right? Keeps you in line. You know, it keeps you in tune to what the people want. So, all right, gentlemen, I appreciate y'all coming through like Kung Fu. We'll probably do this again. I want to start doing these once a month, having these constitutional discussions. I've just been inundated with the election cycle and my involvement here in Utah with politics and the election cycle. Is just this year has just been a complete and utter mess for me, man. It's a complete and utter mess. But we're gonna come out fresh. We definitely have to, come together and have discussions about the Constitution and, and express our opinions, what we can, what we cannot change, what we will change, and all that good stuff. So appreciate y'all, gentlemen, for coming through.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Any last remarks from you guys
Yes.
before we close out?
No, thanks so much.
Yep.
All right, appreciate y'all, gentlemen. Have fun, and we'll see y'all again.
All right, next time.
Thanks.
All right, take care.